Hey guys, so I had a tree fall across a fence that had been in place for about 25 years and it was performing great. There was no signs of wood rot, but there's something I did 25 years ago. I added this right here to my process of building that fence, and this actually was completely free. It's something I heard about from farmers from many centuries, not centuries, but many decades ago. And it's a way to make your outside lumber last, whether we're talking about a deck, we're talking about a fence, whatever it is that's made out of wood, you can make it last for really forever, for your lifetime, for up to possibly over 100 years. Now this right here is used motor oil, and I get it each time I get an oil change, and I've got 3 separate vehicles. I just get this for free back from the oil change, and depending on the one I go to, sometimes they actually give me more than I ask for, so they might give me 5 or 10 gallons, and my vehicle doesn't hold near that much. So anyways, used motor oil can preserve wood for a long time, but you probably are thinking, well, is it going to be very sticky, or is the stain going to be very dark? Well, there's a couple of things you can do to lighten up the stain, and I can tell you, I stained this right here after I lightened it just a little bit through another chemical method, and I'll show you that in a second. But you can see this is the unstained side, and this is the stained side. It's dry, it's been out in the sun, and it's not sticky. This is the top of a cut that I made on a dog-eared fence I'm working on, but you can paint it directly on there, or you can spray it and then go back and paint it after it starts to dry a little bit. But just remember that this is something that you can adjust this color of it, and you can also put it on woods, decks, and things like that, fences that already exist that can help them. But there's a couple of other methods I'm going to show you to make this last for a long time. But this works really well, and it's just an old farmer's trick that's been around for, like I say, probably over 100 years or close to it. Now, one thing I'm doing that most people don't do with their fences is I actually roof it. Very few people do that. And if you've ever been to Japan, you'll notice that some of those ancient fences that go back sometimes centuries, fences, gates, all sorts of entryways, they'll have a roof on it. So I just take some ordinary boards, the dog ears, and just do them horizontally and use it as a rain, keeps the rain off the fence, and it makes it last even longer. So that's one of the tricks. This fence would still be, the old fence that I had to tear down would still be there, but we had actually 3 trees fall in a wind event, which totally destroyed that area. But there was no wood rot, and it still looked great. Now that's trick number 1 to make a fence last for up to 50 years longer. But let me bring you in closer, and I'll show you a trick when you're putting in the posts themselves, something you can do to make the post impervious to water, and it keeps water off of them very well. Now, whether I'm building a deck or whether I'm building a fence like this, I always put in my concrete. I'm too lazy to mix it. I always just dry pour it and then add water. But rather than just putting water on top of it, I create kind of a bowl effect here when I first put in the concrete powder, and I create that bowl. Now you're thinking probably, well, what about later when this just collects water all the time? There's a second step to this, but the first step is creating that bowl, adding the water very slowly, allow it to sink in, and the concrete to absorb as much as it can. Now, this particular concrete is the fast dry concrete. It's supposed to dry within 2 hours. So I give it time to absorb the water. I put in a second dose of it, and sometimes a third, but usually two doses of water. Filled up to about here will absorb it pretty well because there's a lot of moisture in the ground from all the rain we've had. The second step that I haven't gotten to yet is I will mound a secondary pile of concrete on here to act as kind of a watershed, so it pushes water away from the post altogether. Now we're going to head back out to the greenhouse, and I'll show you underground and the boards that are coming in contact with the ground. I'll show you a way to make them last for, like I said, up to 100 years. Now I'll give you a quick story of how I found out about this. I remember when I was very young, I don't even think I was a teenager yet, my dad liked to take drives through the countryside and visit new places, and I remember seeing these old farms that had ceased to operate, but the fencing was still there, and a lot of times the barns were still there. And I would ask my dad, you know, what happened and how is the barn still there after so many decades and almost a century? It's because of the way they treated the wood. They treated it with either diesel fuel or a mixture of diesel fuel and used motor oil. Mix those two together and just stain the wood with it, and it will last literally probably for the rest of your lifetime. So it's just one of those things that farmers lived very frugal lives. They didn't have the money to buy expensive things to stain a barn if it existed at the time. Sometimes the barns were built before these stains even existed, so they just made do with what they had on hand, which was usually motor oil and sometimes diesel fuel. Now I know the next question is going to be, what about the toxicity of motor oil? Well, motor oil is probably not as toxic as some of the stains that are out there on the market. There are all sorts of chemicals and ways that they make those stains, and I can tell you they're not drinkable. They're certainly not drinkable. Motor oil isn't either, but I don't think it's as toxic. But anyways, motor oil starts in the ground anyway. Sometimes you have motor oil at ground level in certain parts of the world, or I should just say crude oil in certain parts of the world. So motor oil, yes, there is a certain level of toxicity, but most of this motor oil, if done properly, is going to be absorbed by the wood. It's not going to go into the ground anyways because the wood is going to be thirsty. And another key to doing this is make sure the wood you're using is very, very dry. You don't want to use a wood that has a high moisture content. You want to wait till there's been a sunny day and the wood has had a chance to dry out. Now, as you can see, this wood that I've actually done half of it with a motor oil, I've did a slight mixture, 50-50 mix with diesel fuel to lighten up the motor oil. I didn't want it quite so dark. Sometimes it looks good and a little bit darker if that's what you like, but if you want just more of a natural look, use that 50-50 mix and it'll lighten it up. Now another question might be, how will I spray an existing deck if it's already in place? That's where your handheld sprayer comes from. If you're spraying underneath and you don't want to try to go in there and do all that stuff, obviously you're going to need a respirator, and you need to put a tarp on the ground below so you can collect any of the overspray, and just make sure you don't do it on a windy day. Now I think the next question will be, what about synthetic motor oils versus real motor oils? And I think Pennzoil is one of the few that actually make traditional motor oils, at least at the store closest to my house. But you can use either way because there's crude oil in both of them, so it works just as well whether you're using synthetic or traditional motor oil. So don't be worried about whether or not it's synthetic or just genuine motor oil like they used to sell before synthetic came around. Now, as the old saying goes, oil and water doesn't mix. Motor oil is hydrophobic, which means it repels water, and that is the thing that really causes the destruction of wood, or what comes along with the water, which is the mold and things like that that grow once the wood becomes wet. You would think that pressure-treated lumber would be enough to take care of these problems, and it was at one time, but something changed in the early 2000s. I think it was around 03, 04, is that the manufacturers, there was a massive lawsuit because of the chemicals that were being put into pressure-treated wood, and so they deleted one of the most important things out of that process, which is arsenic, and that's what made the wood last so long. I've got decking from, I would say 27 years ago, maybe 26 years ago, and it was never treated using this method I'm talking about today, but it is in perfect condition because it was treated before 2003, and it's lasted, I believe it was around 99 when I installed this decking, and it's in great shape. Same thing at a relative's house, that she has a decking that's been there for 30 years that was treated using the arsenic method and all the other chemicals, whatever they added in there. Now I suppose that there was some type of problem. I heard it was children coming in contact with wood and there was some type of health issues, but I don't know that for sure. I just know that I've heard these things along the way. But you have to preserve wood, or you might as well just go with those super expensive plastic decking materials. I forget exactly how they're termed, poly something or another, poly lumber, but that is super expensive, like $30 a piece for decking. Although it will last a long time, they do fade as well, because I've noticed at a friend's house, when he installed his poly deck, it looked great in the beginning, but over time the sun did fade it quite a bit. So if it's in full sun, it's going to look older, but it will stay in great shape for a long time. But you're going to pay dearly for that kind of decking. Now I'm going to take you back to the deck in just a second and show you where I applied a dark motor oil, where I didn't dilute it with diesel fuel, and I applied it to, I built a storage closet under my decking area, and I think it looks pretty good. It looks like traditional stain, but it just really, to me, I believe looks great. And the thing I love most about it is free. Just remember that if you are going to apply it, you don't want to just spray it on there. The spray would be if you're having to spray underneath and there's not a aesthetic reason where people are going to see it, you could just spray it on there and not worry so much about the way it looks. But if you're going to apply it to a place where people walk, or they are going to be able to visually see it, you're going to need to use a brush like this, a stain brush, to make sure you spread it where it has a nice even coat. Now I built this closet under my decking area, and I thought it turned out pretty good using the motor oil, and this was undiluted motor oil. I thought it turned out pretty good. It's a little bit darker maybe than I would traditionally want it. I'll probably do something a little different with the fencing I showed you earlier, but as I said, it doesn't look bad, and best of all, it was absolutely free. The guy at the oil change place gave me 10 gallons, so I actually have some left to do my next project. Now, one time in this outdoor shed, I had a ramp here that I used to drive my lawnmower up into the shed, but since I've got a different type of shed now I keep my lawnmower in, I replaced that ramp with this because I thought it might be a little bit safer and less likely to slip in a rain event. But anyways, this was treated. It's got a little bit of dirt on it where I've been walking back and forth through the garden, but this was treated with a diluted motor oil, 50% motor oil and 50% diesel fuel. And as you can see, it's not quite as dark as what I just showed you up under the deck, but it still leaves a nice stain. So you can mix and match. And when we get back in the greenhouse, I'm going to tell you about an even more unusual item you could do for a unique stain color. Now, if you work in the right type of industry, you might have access to a large amount of transmission fluid. And transmission fluid has a lot of the same similar properties that motor oil does. But if you can get your hands on some used transmission fluid, it has a reddish tinge to it. So if you wanted a unique stain for a deck, you could try that. It would be kind of a light red. It wouldn't be like a fire engine red, but it would be kind of a unique thing. I would definitely do a test on a small piece of wood, let it dry in the sunlight, and then see what it looks like. Now, a lot of people might ask specifically about this, doesn't it leave a sticky residue? Well, this has been out in the sun for a few hours and it's completely dried out. The wood has absorbed all of the motor oil, and so it's not slippery. It feels dry to the touch, but now it's protected from water and any of those insects that might try to attack it as well. Some of the wood boring bees and other problems. That's another thing that I haven't mentioned, that a lot of wood can be attacked by a lot of different insects, flying and otherwise. So before I talk about the fence post, I want to say one thing about my vegetable garden. I used raised vegetable beds, and I would never advise putting this into a raised vegetable bed because the soil could absorb something. There's always a possibility. So I wouldn't even paint the outside of them with this particular solution. I would use something that I used in creating some different ponds around the property, which is pond liner, and it's been known to last anywhere from 30 to 40 years. You can line it with the inside of your beds, and it'll keep that wood that's coming in contact with the soil in your raised garden beds from ever having any chance of rotting because it's completely protected. Now, as I was going to say about the fence post, let's imagine this is anywhere from 8 to 10 feet long. You have a whole bucket of motor oil. What you want to do is you want to make sure that your fence post or whatever you're doing, you're building something, a deck, these posts that are going to go directly in the ground, you want to make sure that they're very, very dry. You don't want to do this after it rained because there's going to be a certain amount of moisture in it, but you want to fill your bucket about halfway full and put about 3 to 4 of these in the bucket to where it's up to where you're going to have it at the ground level. So if you're going to put these in the ground, I usually do about 1.5 to 2 feet. So you can get a 7-gallon bucket that's a little bit taller. You could put them in a little bit deeper. Put them in there and let them sit overnight and do this process over a period of about a week. And you can stain all of your posts with this. The wood there will absorb it. It will be protected from rot, from funguses, from anything that might be in the ground that will destroy your fence and cause it just at some point or another to fall over. So just remember, you want to treat those fence posts in a submerged solution of your oil, and you can do the oil/diesel mixture there. So if you've priced decking stain and wood stains lately, you'll know that just for 5 gallons can be $200 and over, depending on the brand. And this motor oil, I got it completely free. And matter of fact, the guy at the oil change place said he'd be glad to give me as much as I want because he actually has to pay to dispose of it at his particular location. But there is one last thing I will say. Depending on your neighborhood, your municipality, your county, wherever you live, you want to check the ordinance about doing this and make sure that there's nothing specifically saying that you can't. Personally, it's been done for years and years and years. If you have a railroad track anywhere near you, those posts or those beams under the railroad track, they've been treated with some pretty toxic chemicals. I think it used to be called creosote. What they're treating it with now, I have no idea. Maybe it's something different, but the wood literally stays there in some cases for over 100 years. So that's not being treated with something that's natural. It's definitely something that's a chemical-based product. So just remember that if you want to save a lot of money on your next stain project, do a little test sample, make sure you like it. There's not going to be an odor, there's not going to be any slipperiness. You want to make sure that you give it a week. You want to do this in the warmer months so it has a chance to kind of be baked in through the sun. It'll dry in about 5 to 7 days, and you don't have to worry about doing this again for maybe 5 to 7 years if you get a tremendous amount of rain in your area. If you have an area that gets less rain, you may be doing this only once every 15 to 20 years. Now there is one more thing I can tell you, that if you don't like a dark stain, you want the most natural color possible, you can use new motor oil. It'll still be cheaper than the $200 per 5 gallons of the traditional stains you find at the big box stores, but you could use new motor oil. Of course, make sure you use your tarps and your gloves and everything like that, but that way you can get a much more natural look on your wood. If you have any questions about this video or any previous video, I hope you'll become a public subscriber first, because I get so many comments and questions. It's hard for me to do the complete answer every single day. So I just try to put people who are already public subscribers to the front of the line. That's how I filter them. So guys, I really appreciate you watching, and have a great day.